Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kristen Newman, and I suspect that I am not well known to this audience. I am a biotech patent lawyer. I was in private practice for 20 years doing biotech, biopharma, medical device, patent work, basically anything you could do with a patent, I have done. And then I joined a patent pool licensing company called MPEGLA about 5 years ago to help them evaluate and execute patent pool licensing programs in the biotech space. So I will confess to you all that I have a comfortable relationship with patents. Um, and I think patent pools are a good solution for standards like what Mark talked about. Standards are about sharing, and a patent pool is a way to share patents that relate to a standard. So, but I do mean this with all sincerity. I'm not wedded to patents as being the only viable form of handling innovation and intellectual property. I know they work well in certain sectors like biopharma when you need to raise a lot of money to get a product from idea to market, but I know that within this community there is a very strongly held view that open source is another viable way to deal with intellectual property management and sharing. And so we need somebody who knows about open source on our IP committee. So I hope that some of you who have experience there will step forward to help, the rest of us understand open source, where it could fit into this program. And we will evaluate together what GP Wright should be doing with respect to intellectual property. I think that it's really exciting for me because you all can write on a blank sheet of paper. I don't have any slides because it is a blank piece of paper right now. We can talk about patents, we can talk about open source, we can marry the two if they can be merged, and that makes sense. We can do one for biopharma output from this project, and we can do something else for the software high-tech side. There's no better example of the convergence of biotech and high-tech than this project. So it means we can be creative and we can work together and figure something out. Okay, so the IP committee, and we may even rename this to the Sharing Materials, Data, and Innovation Committee to get away from these canonical, old-fashioned terms about intellectual property. But we need more of you, and I hope that some of you will step forward and work with us. We want to have monthly phone calls, and we want to ultimately develop a policy statement about intellectual property from GP Wright. We want to have some sort of a framework for evaluating intellectual property as these pilot projects come forth. We want to have some guidelines. Guidelines we need to give careful thought to because I think that they may become, they'll be very interesting to people working in genomics engineering, and we have an opportunity to be thought leaders in that area. So we should give careful consideration to it. Basically starting from first principles, I think we all can probably agree that we want broad dissemination of the fruits of GP Wright. And from what I've heard the last 2 days and the meeting a year ago and the meeting before that, there are going to be amazing things coming out of this project, intellectual output. And I think we all are in favor of being broadly disseminated, easy to use. At the same time, what I heard yesterday is that many of you are talking about curing disease. You're talking about applications of this technology that would need to get commercialized, taking the basic science we're going to learn and turning it into products that can improve the human condition and improve life on Earth. And some of those are going to take a lot of money to move from product through regulatory hurdles and finally have a product on the market. And so balancing these broad goals of wanting to have widespread dissemination with the goals of commercializing products Do we want to be seeding startup companies? Do we want to actually be contributing to job growth in this country? We have the ability to do all those things, and it's just going to take balancing the two. So that's what this committee is in a really terrific position to give a lot of great thought to. And then so that's kind of where we are right now. We're just at the beginning. It'll take more shape as we move forward with some of these pilot projects, and we can begin to consider them in a more structured way. But I want to, we've been talking about the future for 2 days. I'm going to take us back to history. All right, I'm going to take us back to 1858 and a man named Abraham Lincoln. So Abraham Lincoln was an inventor. He held a patent. And he also wrote some beautiful words on a lot of subjects. He delivered a lecture on discoveries and inventions. And when he talked about the patent system, he said, it adds the fuel of interest to the fire of genius. Okay? Think about that. Fire of genius is all of you, all the scientists in this room. You embody the fire of genius, and that is going to produce amazing results from this product. The fuel of interest is investment money, okay? That's what fuels these projects forward so that they can be fully beneficial. And to Abraham Lincoln's thinking, patents were a really critical element of that, because investment capital, as many of you know, is fickle. It will go wherever it can get its highest return. And so in his mind, a patent was very important for giving investors the protection that they needed and the hope, at least, that there would be a return on their investment. So he saw patents in that light, and I encourage this group to start from there and think about what other forms of intellectual property, policy, maybe open source, could also help to fuel interest. So that's my piece. And do we have any questions? Nancy.
One of the things is, we have a lot of countries that are participating. We have a lot of countries that are participating in this project right now, and one thing that whatever you want to call it, that sharing group wants to call it, needs to consider, what are the differences, the regulatory and legal differences between those countries, and to determine whether there are any issues that arise, or whether there needs to be any reconciliation amongst them.
Yes, it is larger than the United States of America. Other questions? We have one in the side and then one in the back and one on the left. Go ahead.
Not on? Oh, there you go. Some of the funding agencies and funding sources will have their own policies relating to intellectual property as well, which will have to be considered, maybe on a case-by-case basis. But the other thing that I've always kind of favored is not a full open source, but to allow basically a royalty-free license for research, which would enable academics to freely use all of the intellectual property that's developed. But if somebody actually came up with a product, it would be covered by the intellectual property and not free.
Yes.
At that point.
So yeah, the free license for research is a concept that's already at work in the life sciences patent licensing field. That's already kind of an unspoken rule that you don't go collecting money on basic research, and I can't imagine this group would want to go there. So, yeah. Okay. In the back, do we have a microphone?
Yes. So I think there's an important piece of community history here which could be drawn on to help bootstrap this process. A few years back, Creative Commons had a project called Science Commons that started looking at some of these issues, among other things, how to, basically simultaneously leverage IP arrangements in order to support openness as well as commercialization. If you are not already in touch with him, I would very strongly suggest getting in touch with John Wilbanks, who ran that project. I think he's at Sage Bionetworks these days. He's a very valuable resource for helping get through a whole bunch of the bootstrap questions which have already been thought about and have some useful legal code ideas in place on them.
Great, thank you. Fabulous. So that's one other thing I wanted to mention is we are collecting all of these resources and examples of other structures that have been put in place by other groups, you know, what has worked. We want to evaluate all of them and then take a ground up approach. What works for us, not necessarily top down what we should do based on what others have done.
Kristen,
Mark.
I just want to weigh in. We ended up in a really nice conversation around ways of sharing innovation. I do want to weigh in, and it was my suggestion to upgrade the name of this working team or working group beyond IP, but to include sharing of data and materials as a key piece of what's going to be allow the currency of the project to happen. And there are some innovations around OpenMTA coming out of the BioBricks Foundation and other ideas around moving stuff, which can, again, it generates heat and not light in most of the cases if we're going to end up in a restrictive environment. And I just want to say that I think that's an agenda item for the future.
Very good, I agree. Okay, and then we'll take one more and then they're gonna yank me off.
And I just want to briefly comment on the Science Commons comment, absolutely. And so the project that spun out of there was called Green Exchange. Okay. And I was at the Creative Commons Global Summit just a week ago in Toronto. And Creative Commons is in fact revisiting that as a potential model for looking at intellectual property and patents in the future. And so I'm happy to put you in contact with people there.
Terrific. Okay, thank you everyone.